All right, we've got some breaking news for you. It's just come in. President Trump saying he wants a straight 50% tariff on the EU.
He has long taken issue with the European Union, and now we're actually seeing that result in...
What happens when a U.S. president slaps a 50% tariff on Europe? And Europe responds by pulling out a $43 billion Boeing deal, rerouting trade through Canada, and triggering a $2 trillion shift in global commerce. It's not just a trade dispute, it's a controlled breakup. While Washington boasts about its leverage and rants about steel and peanut butter, Brussels is cutting new deals, courting China, and rewriting the global trade rules, without the U.S. in the room. This isn't a warning, it's the exit. By the time America notices, it could already be locked out. The $43 billion deal that vanished. A massive $43 billion aircraft deal just evaporated. EU trade with the U.S. is unraveling, and markets are on edge. But now the real question isn't whether the U.S. and Europe are engaged in a trade war. It's whether the transatlantic alliance has collapsed under the pressure of a 50% tariff. On May 30th, President Trump declared negotiations with the EU were deadlocked and ordered an immediate 50% blanket tariff on all European imports, starting June 1st. The targeted goods included steel, aluminum, cars, agricultural products, and electronics. Within 48 hours, European stock markets dropped 2.1%, and Boeing found itself at risk of losing its largest export contract ever. According to Bloomberg, if the EU's retaliatory measures materialize, the potential loss to U.S. trade could exceed $2 trillion over the next decade. Former EU negotiator Ignacio Garcia Brachero told Euronews, if the U.S. refuses to reverse course, Europe has no choice but to escalate. But what comes after escalation? Europe may already have the answer, and it's not across the Atlantic. Europe strikes back. The European Commission wasted no time. In direct response to Trump's 50% tariff, Brussels confirmed it was finalizing a retaliation package targeting $95 billion in U.S. goods, while quietly freezing a €43 billion Boeing aircraft deal. Meanwhile, Ryanair's $30 billion order of 737 MAX jets came under review. CEO Michael O'Leary noted that Boeing's rising costs were no longer sustainable. As a result, Airbus saw a 3.4% surge on the Frankfurt exchange, and China's COMAC suddenly became part of the conversation. An EU airline buying Chinese jets, once unthinkable, is now being considered. The U.S. aerospace sector, already down 6.2% year-to-date due to supply chain concerns, now faces structural contraction. But the real danger here wasn't just retaliation. It was a trial run for a future where the U.S. and Boeing are no longer dominant players in the global market. The targeted response. When Europe slapped tariffs on U.S. products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi's jeans, and peanut butter, it wasn't just symbolic. It was a direct strike on industries tied to key U.S. swing states. Harley-Davidson's 2024 EU exports are projected to drop 30%, with the company anticipating a $145 million loss through Q3 2025. However, U.S. agriculture took the hardest hit. U.S. farm exports to Europe plunged by $23.2 billion, according to the USDA. Wisconsin-based Land O'Lakes, a dairy co-op, cited operational strain due to the EU's hike in butter and cheese tariffs. Meanwhile, the U.S. trade deficit hit a record $140.5 billion in early 2025, contradicting claims that tariffs would strengthen domestic industries. As Bloomberg pointed out, tariffs meant to protect the U.S. economy have instead exposed its fragile dependencies. The real pivot, geopolitical and strategic. But the real pivot wasn't economic, it was geopolitical. Europe didn't just retaliate, it reoriented. While Washington was burning diplomatic bridges, Ottawa was quietly building them. Under the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, the EU and Canada eliminated 98% of tariffs, creating a frictionless corridor projected to facilitate over €90 billion in trade annually by 2026. As U.S. tariffs drove up steel and auto prices, European firms like Siemens and Alolum began shifting their procurement pipelines toward Quebec and Ontario. According to Financial Times, Canadian-EU clean tech trade rose 41% year over year, led by a €1.2 billion hydrogen deal at last year's EU-Canada Clean Technology Summit. Canada steps in, a new strategic partner. While the U.S. shut itself out of climate-related funding, Canada offered open market access aligned with EU labor, digital, and environmental standards. Former Canadian Trade Minister Chrystia Freeland remarked that what began as a free trade deal between Canada and the EU has now evolved into a strategic partnership. But the most telling sign of this shift? Europe is no longer treating Canada as a neighbor to the US, but as a replacement. This isn't a mere tariff dispute. It's the unraveling of the Western trade consensus. In just 10 weeks, escalating tariffs, from 10% on aluminum to 50% across the board, triggered retaliatory protocols, WTO complaints, and the potential cancellation of at least 2 major transatlantic deals. The EU has suspended a €21 billion retaliation package until July 15th, but it's preparing a second retaliation list targeting $95 billion in U.S. exports, contingent on the outcome of talks. According to CNBC, White House officials do not view Trump's tariff announcements as formal policy, but European Commission spokesperson Olaf Gill publicly stated on June 2nd, "We are finalizing countermeasures that will take effect on July 14th or earlier." In other words, even if a deal is possible, time is running out. Europe's quiet shift, self-sufficiency, and clean tech. While the U.S. escalated tariffs, the EU quietly shifted gears, pouring investment into clean tech and trade infrastructure to reduce reliance on the U.S. According to Financial Times, EU-Canada clean energy projects increased by 41% in 2024, with €1.2 billion earmarked for hydrogen and battery initiatives. The Repower EU initiative has committed to producing 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen annually by 2030, enough to offset nearly €60 billion in imported fossil fuels. A new power shift in aviation, and now the aviation sector is feeling the shift. If Ryanair exits its $30 billion Boeing deal, it would mark the first time a major EU airline selects Chinese Comac jets over U.S. aircraft. According to Bloomberg, Ryanair executives are in talks with Comac, citing delivery delays and price hikes of up to 14% on 737 MAX components. Switching to Comac would not only hurt Boeing financially, but could legitimize China's entry into the Western-dominated aviation industry, undermining the FAA's influence and potentially fragmenting global aviation compliance. The new global trade framework. The CETA agreement wasn't just a trade deal, it was a test run. Now Brussels is applying this model to other regions. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way.